Hey there, woodworkers. This is part 3 of our small bookshelf project. And in this video, we'll be making the shelves. So let's get started. Okay, so I previously selected my wood and I have rough cut it as well. My rough length on these 3 shelves is 13 inches, so that's what I started to cut. And then I realized it may be easier just to run it as one large board and then cut them down later. So because this board is a little bit smaller, I'm going to be running that through the planer first and then following it up with this larger board just to make sure that we don't have any issues with the board that's a little bit shorter. Okay, so I've set the planer to 1 inch to start. My final thickness is a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to plane this down to 9 or 10/16 and then sand the rest of the way. When you're working with wood, sometimes certain types of wood can get more tear out than others. Sapele is one of those, so I'm gonna leave myself a full 1/8 of an inch to sand down to my final 1/2 inch thickness. Okay, I'm here at the wide belt sander and I'm gonna be sanding to my final thickness. I've got my shelves here, but I also am gonna have one of my sides nearby because as I approach that 1/2 inch thickness, I really want to make sure that it's going to fit tightly into my dados and won't be loose at all. Since I planed to 10/16, that's where I'm going to start here. Okay, so set 0.62. Okay, I'm at 0.56, and at this point, I'm gonna start double checking against my side. Okay, so it's still too big to fit in those dados, which makes sense. But now, each time, rather than removing 2/100ths, I'm gonna slow down and just remove 1/100th and check it each time, because you want to be able to snugly fit it in the dados, but you don't want it to be loose. Okay, so at 0.55, it wasn't fitting. At 0.54, it's not too bad, but this is a little looser than I would like. So perhaps what I should have done is switched over to millimeters and then gone at even smaller increments. It'll end up being just fine, but if you can, you do want it to just be just nice and snug. It'll be fine. But I'm gonna stop there. So if I had just gone straight to 0.5, not thinking about it, then it would definitely be too small for my dados. So This measurement is fairly close, but it's not perfect. So if you need perfect measurements for joinery, then make sure to check as you go. Okay, now that I've established my final thickness, I'm going to edge joint and establish one good edge on each of these pieces. And I'm going to double check for square. So that one's looking good. I'm going to put a little mark on it so that I don't forget that that's the one that I've done. Okay, so that one's looking good now too. Okay, now I'm at the table saw, and it's instructing me to rip to a final width of 5.9375. If it's hard to remember what that decimal is, I do have some notes over here, so it's 15/16. So I need to cut these down to 5 and 15/16. I'll set my rip fence to match. And I'm remembering to put my nice jointed edge towards the rip fence so that my non-jointed edge is my offcut. If I've done it correctly, then this should just fit in perfectly and go from the front of my side to the dado on the back side, which it does. Okay, now I'm going to check an end for square. And this is square, so I'm okay to move on. If it wasn't square, then I would need to cut off just a small amount just to square that up. So I'm going to cut off this other end. That is square also. So I'm good to begin. Again, I'm going to keep my offcuts just in case I need them for something later on in this project. So our final length should be 12 inches. So I'm actually going to set my rip fence to 12 inches. And I'm going to use a miter gauge to do my cross cutting. The end that I checked for square should go on this side so that the non-square end is your offcut. I chose to use the table saw for this crosscut, but I also could have carefully used the upcut saw or the miter saw. Whatever you prefer. All right, so I've milled and squared my shelves. The last thing that I would do on these is to finish sand the faces. I'm not gonna sand close to the ends because I wanna leave that as thick as possible to fit in my dados. But for the rest of this face, I could go ahead and finish sand. I'm gonna hold off on doing any sanding to the edges or corners until after it's assembled. So I finished the shelves, I've finished the sides. Now it's kind of exciting because we can start to see what it's gonna look like. In the next video, we'll show assembling and gluing together the shelves and the sides.